The Nova Sorceress has gotten off and on love over the years in terms of player favor, though personally it's one of my favorite easy mode builds in the game when it comes to, well, endgame gear. And despite the common misconception, it is actually a fairly reasonable starter build, even though in normal you'll be chugging potions like you're at an all-night kegger. Now the reason for this is, well, Nova. Despite being able to pack away a lot of interesting functionality, especially at the higher end, is a mana hog for what it does, since it is entirely designed to be a crowd control rather than a single target, resulting in the mana efficiency for single targets being, well, atrocious, but the efficiency when swarmed by enemies being quite solid. That said, there's essentially three approaches to building this as well. The speedcast build, which is a bit harder to get in solo play, that gets up to 200% faster cast and can spam the fastest of the bunch, but does noticeably less damage per cast. The standard 105% builds that have some variety in equipment, but are fairly consistent across the board, though with Sunder Charms one does come out a bit ahead of the others. And finally, the non-standard 105% build, that is the self-wielded Infinity build that I actually prefer for a few reasons. Though before we get to the endgame versions of these, let's take a look at how you get there in the first place if you want to hold on to your skill resets, which is thankfully straightforward since there is not a lot of variety with this build in terms of skill choices people generally make unless they're going dual elemental. In normal, you'll be investing 1 point into warmth, which you can do fairly early on, and you can get 1 point into charge bolt as well, since we'll need it later for some other skills. But as soon as you start getting levels, you'll want to be getting those hard points into static field and Nova itself, with Nova taking priority whenever you get to it. And of course, you do want to get your 1 point wonder of teleport as well, since this build benefits a lot from high mobility and faster cast. And of course, at the end of normal, you'll be getting lightning mastery too. In terms of gear, stealth armor and a lore helmet are going to be things you beeline for in normal. For everything else, tier runes are your best friend and mana per kill, since you will be burning mana far faster than you can recover it, even with dumping heavily into energy, which thankfully we do with this build, though it will be a little punishing to do so in normal since your life is low. If you don't want to use a skill reset, you'll want to struggle through this. As you get into Nightmare, this focus on mana will pay off, as will your ability to get items such as Spirit for yourself, with plus skills and faster cast being the most important parts of this that appear on both the sword version that you'll be getting now, as well as the shield version you'll be getting later on in Hell. This will also be whenever you get access to Insight, which will help you keep your mana up for the next part of the run. And if you're curious who you want to wield this with, it will be an Act 2 Prayer Mercenary, and while some people do prefer the Holy Freeze to slow stuff down, I generally prefer Prayer so you can keep your life up even when poisoned through the energy shield. The reason for this focus on mana in Nightmare is because between investing in Lightning Mastery at this point, since we already finished off Nova and Static, we also want to start investing in Telekinesis and Energy Shield with 1 point in Energy Shield for now, but dumping into Telekinesis like our life depends on it because, well, it does. By the time you get to the end of Nightmare, you should have max Nova, Static, Lightning Mastery, and at or near max Telekinesis, since you should be in the low 70s by then before trying to take on Hell difficulty. This will allow you to ramp up your durability as you proceed through Hell, since if you're doing things right, you've been staying with enough points in Strength and Dexterity for gear, and every last drop you have into Energy, which, while a pain against Bale due to Mana Curse, will be making maintaining Energy Shield and your steady Novas a lot easier. This will be nice in Hell, since at this point we'll be dumping almost exclusively into Energy Shield for survival's sake. That said, if you're going solo self-found, you'll need to either farm a Sundering Charm or just be willing to teleport past lightning immunes if your mercenary cannot handle them. But this is a common problem with mono-elemental builds, which we'll address in some of the upcoming videos, which are much easier to bypass the need for Sunder Charms on. That said, Hell's Bale fight should be the only boss fight that is a pain though, thankfully, and a few succubus encounters as well, of course, just because they do that infernal blood mana curse that causes you to use life instead of mana to cast your spell, which can be a bit dicey and is reason some people put extra points into vitality on this build. Personally, I just stick with mana and do what this build was intended to do, and that is quickly sweep areas like a madman, killing every last trash mob for runes, charms, and even base drops. Now, gear-wise through that, your stuff won't change too much other than just focusing on more plus skills and more faster cast. With this build, the goal is 105% faster cast overall, but going through solo self-found, you'll probably be stuck in the 70s in the best case scenario, unless you get some lucky drops, which is tolerable, just not ideal. And don't worry if you're a bit lower than that with bad spirit rolls, since the breakpoint before 105 is only 63, so even 2 mid-quality spirits should be enough, or even just some faster cast rings. That said, if you are able to get faster cast early on from something such as Mage Fists, which are fairly common, and we even use them in the final build, and some faster cast rings or amulets, you can make a Crescent Moon for some extra help with your damage that will generally outperform Spirit, and be a good start on one of your potential final build weapons, even if the rest of the chase gear is fairly specific, but only some of it is actually hard to find. Probably the most difficult parts of this chase gear to find are going to be things like Griffin's Eye and any of the rainbow facets you decide to use in your setup. This is because while these are cornerstone for the build thanks to the faster cast on Griffins, as well as their impacts on lightning damage, or more importantly enemy lightning resist, they are exceedingly rare because in Griffin Eye's case, there's only so many places enemies can drop it outside of terror zones. And for rainbow facets, even if you farm enemies that regularly drop jewels, they still need to be high enough level and drop the right rainbow facet when it does come, since only 2 of the 8 possible rainbow facets will actually help lightning. The other hard thing to find, other than Stone of Jordans if you have bad luck farming them or have some aversion to farming in Nightmare difficulty, is going to be Arachnid's Mesh. Again, it just can't drop from a lot of places outside of high-level terror zones and, of course, level 85 zones. So it will be a pain to farm until you're in the farming places. That said, all of these can be traded, and less than perfect ones in both cases will be just fine for this build. That said, the rest of the gear is relatively easy to get if you're going for the shield using build, which you probably will do if you're on a mid-level budget, with Mage Fist being my choice for gloves for both versions because it's not only easy to find, but it's a good source of faster cast and gives us +1 to fire skills, which further boosts our warmth, which is extra handy when stacking with our mercenary meditation for keeping us topped off on mana while fighting. On the armor, we have an easy to farm and nightmare armor called Skin of the Viper Magi. I have an rune in this one, but if you're feeling fancy, you can put a rainbow fasten in it for some extra punch. This armor is nice for a lot of reasons: +1 all skills, good resist even on the garbage rolls, and most importantly, faster cast. There is also the alternative Ormus robes with little less faster cast, which works just fine for the shield wearing version, but requires perfect gear to use with our alternate setup that I actually prefer more. Though before we get to that, in the amulet for the sword and board version, you just need plus skills, and sadly I don't have any exceptionally good Sorceress caster amulets since they just don't like rolling for me, but we do have a 10% faster cast one here for the Infinity Swap. If you wanted to use Ormus, you'd need a 20% faster cast amulet for it, so that's why I stay with Viper Magi. Now for the shield version, the reason why it is more flexible is not the weapon. In fact, we sacrifice the weapon slot to use Crescent Moon, and this is even more tempting thanks to the introduction of Sunder Charms to break immunities for us, and removing the need to have an Infinity Mercenary to do this for us, so we can stack it with Insight to keep the mana topped off without wasting a ton of potions. And in case you're wondering, you can make Crescent Moon in a Crystal Sword for this. I just didn't feel like wasting the rune since I already had this for other characters. But what adds flexibility for us is the use of Spirit in the shield slot. This can be used to free up a lot of things, such as if you wanted to swap out the armor for Chains of Honor, you could. Or if you didn't have a good caster amulet, you could swap that out for Mara's or Talrash's, as long as you kept the faster cast on the armor, just so much that you keep over 105%, so Spirit really does help with the flexibility here. That said, if you do have perfect gear, you can use rainbow facet setups in both the weapon and shield slot, and there are arguments for it, with the ability to go 6-socket rainbow facet swords, or 4-socket rainbow facet shields, or even just a few of the unique items in these slots, like the 3 sockets on Headhunter's Glory, or 2 on Moser's for a little more resist packing. That said, I would say sword and shield versions are actually only second place for me, with or without Sunder, since my favorite is still hands down using Infinity myself, in this case an Ethereal Scythe Infinity for style points, and because I'm too lazy to repair and recast Cyclone Armor if it wasn't Ethereal anyways. The reason for my love of this is that even on mediocre rolls, it can punch through enemy resistances hard, whether they're immune or not. It boosts our run walk as well, and is all around a really good boost for our mercenary too, by boosting its chance to hit, which if you have a decent mercenary setup means he'll survive pretty much anything as long as he stays near you. And as you might have noticed from the background footage, this setup generally runs a lot smoother than the sword and board version, which I've been alternating between in the background since I decided to capture bits of multiple test runs this time. Now you may have noticed I did not bother mentioning the charms, since most of you know they should be Lightning Sunder and then Lightning Skillers, but I also didn't mention the boots. This is because it depends on if you use Call to Arms or not, which while is exceptionally useful on this build, and you should use it if you have it, it was faster for me to test this with the loadout on swap for a quick reset between runs. Simply put, if you're using Call to Arms, get plus life boots with like resist and stuff like that. Water walks are a really good choice. If you're not using Call to Arms, get resist boots or mana boots. In my case, I did Inferno Stride for fun because I love Blaze and how it looks. It's just one of those things. But something like Silkweave is great for mana topping, and rare resist boots are great for survival if something shuts down your shield. Overall, this is a moderately difficult build to do solo self-found, but it is possible, and it is a somewhat pricey build to do endgame, but is extremely rewarding and quick with the right setup, as you can tell from the background footage. And if you're curious about how I do my skill setup, I am pretty much consistently holding down right mouse button and just pressing the skill swap key between Teleport and Nova, not ever releasing the button. And I admittedly recorded a lot of this gameplay while watching Critical Role and not really paying attention because, well, it's that simple. So, do you have a favorite lazy build where you pretty much just hold down a single button to win, or do you prefer more engaging builds that require more attention like the one on screen now? Mention it down below, and as always, if you want to watch these without YouTube's jank compression and ads, check out the Patreon since all these videos can be watched uncompressed for just $1 a month, and it supports the creation of far more content.